There we go, and now I should be all live. All right, so hey guys, my name is Felix. I just wanted to go through some details about how to, I think I mentioned before, about how to get set up. This is the first stream of the new year, so you guys might have gotten your devices for Christmas, during the holidays and something like that, so I'll wait for everyone to join in. Guys, if you have any questions, pop them in chat. I'm going to try and get as many questions as I can answered, as well as, everything that I wanted to run through in terms of just general pitfalls that you might encounter when you're setting up the device. I wanted to talk about address poisoning as well, which has become something that's been something that's quite significant that we need to take into account as well. So I wanted to touch briefly on that and why it's so important to make sure that you go through the receive process, and if you're making any transactions actually, that you're checking as many of those digits as you can, because it's really when money's at stake, it's obviously can be stressful. Like I said, we should have one of my colleagues in the chat to be able to answer questions as well soon, but you'll be able to pop those in there as well. I think, just wanted to show off the stacks. I can see some questions in relation to that as well, so hopefully we'll be able to answer those too. But with regards to it, it's got the big e-ink screen, so no backlight or anything like that. It's got the same, it should have the same about the same amount of space as some of the newer devices, but we'll be able to get you updated on all of that as well. But I think what I first wanted to mention, when you're getting all set up and stuff, when you're withdrawing cryptocurrency from an address, from an exchange rather, just to make sure you guys know which network you're withdrawing them on. I don't want to see any of you guys potentially find it hard to manage your funds if you send, let's say, an asset that's on an EVM chain normally to an address that does conform by the 0x, so the EVM type of address, but is on a different derivation path, and you might not be able to see it. So what I did want to mention is, when you're adding the account to actually get the address, just make sure you note how you're getting that address. And this will relate to our address poisoning as well, so I'll go through that in a second. But let's say if I'm withdrawing Ethereum, just Ethereum on the Ethereum mainnet, I could select Ethereum here. But if I wanted to choose, let's say, BNB Smart Chain, Binance Smart Chain, or you wanted to choose Tron, those are different networks that you'll be able to withdraw your assets on. So it's been a crazy year. I know we've wanted to talk about getting your assets off exchanges. I think has been a really big part of the narrative recently, and hopefully we'll be able to help you facilitate that in the future with regards to getting your stuff off exchanges. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention briefly, just to make sure you know which network. And it depends on which networks your exchange supports as well. So for example, Binance, last I checked, you'll be able to manage with you'll be able to withdraw from Optimism, Arbitrum, Binance Smart Chain, BNB Smart Chain, of course, and so on and so forth. Tron is a very popular choice for a lot of users as well. So one thing to mention about Tron is that if your address doesn't have any TRX and you're just wanting to withdraw a TRC20, TRC1020 token or something like that, it'll be prudent to make sure that you have some TRX, some Tron in that account. And you'll be able to manage the assets as you'd like as well. So just something to consider there. All right, so next thing I wanted to talk about was with regards to, address poisoning. It has been something that's been coming up recently. I'm just on our Help Center article with regards to it. And what it might look like for you guys that aren't sure is that you'll have, let's say, this transaction that you might have received, or they might have someone else, some malicious person is trying to get you to looks like they're sending from or to your address, for example. The reason I wanted to mention it is because it has come up that some users might be going to their latest operations, grabbing the address, and thinking that that's the best way to be able to get your own address. And I really wanted to make sure that you guys are going through the receive process. So when I mean the receive process, I'm just going to bring up our hops. And again, I can show you live in Ledger Live as well. But generally speaking, it's just to make sure that you'll be able to see it in this. Once I've added an account, you can go to the receive process. Basically, what it does is it asks the Ledger device for the public key or the address that you'll want to potentially send money to, or assets to in general. And this is important because someone could generate an address that's very similar to your own. And I think if you're used to seeing your address, you might just read the first one or two letters, the last couple letters or characters, and you might interact with a contract that you have not interacted, like that has been written maliciously, or you might send funds from an exchange to one that you may not have intended to. And it's really important and this is why I think a lot of exchanges do have a feature to whitelist addresses. But of course, if you put in an incorrect address of what you think is your address, and it's not, and you haven't received your assets, it might be something to do with someone seeing that you're interacting with a relatively large sum of money, and then try to see if they can make you send to their address, okay? So I really want to stress, guys, it's really important when you do go through and try to double check your addresses. You can do so, via Ledger Live and via the receive flow. If you have, while ENS domains aren't supported within Ledger Live to be able to send and receive in particular, it is something you could probably go to a block explorer to double check against your ENS domain as well if you have one. So those are potential options too. I just wanted to, Ledger Live isn't necessarily the only place that you potentially could make sure to double check your address, and you can make sure to verify instead of trusting each individual source. You can check in multiple locations and be more sure of the things. But that's probably the first thing I wanted to address. I might just skim through the questions quickly that I do see, just to see if I can answer a couple of questions as well. When are we going to be able to sell directly in Ledger Live? Now, actually, there are options to do so. What I'll do is I'll actually go about and add an account, and then we might be able to see some options. But there should be here, BITY, if I remember correctly, was another option to sell. Now, sell being potentially to fiat in particular, so it's just something to consider. You can always convert into stable coins or something like that, but obviously that's totally up to you and what you'd wanted to do. It's just another option. It's just I do totally understand. On and off ramps seem to be a real big sticking point in the industry as a whole. I do have ones that I've used in Australia before. But yeah, they're coming. We're always on the lookout for more on and off ramps. We're trying to talk to these guys. So if you have one that you think is prudent, you can always let us know as well. But yeah, we love on and off ramps. We love integration as well. So definitely let us know. For Ledger Stacks, I did mint the NFT. Can I redeem later after the shipping starts, or I need to pre-order it now? So if you've got the NFT, you've minted it, you can redeem it at any time. Generally speaking, if I remember correctly, there shouldn't be a wait time at the moment. But yes, you'll be able to redeem. Yes, no expiry, exactly. So I just needed to double check that. So what are the chances and ways my assets in a Ledger NOx can get hacked? I think the basis, and I wanted to always emphasize, because Joseph, I can see that you've asked a couple of questions, so I'll try to go through all of those as best I can. First of all, it's the recovery phrase. That's always going to be the basis of security. Okay, so making sure that when you're, let's say I've got a Ledger Nano X, I'm going to set it up. When I write down the recovery phrase, right? I want to make sure I've written it down in only this physical form. You don't want to store it digitally. Why? Because let's say if you've taken a photo of something and your cloud storage gets compromised, then all of your assets are compromised as well. So really the recovery phrase is the basis of security there, and making sure that it comes from a high entropy source and making sure it's truly random. Those are all the things that the Ledger Nano X is trying to provide for you in terms of making sure that at least that part, you're the only one that has that recovery phrase, right? So what are the ways? Is if your recovery phrase gets compromised. Now with the passphrase, I'm assuming you're talking about the passphrase in that second part of the recovery phrase, the second part of the question, not the passphrase, which is slightly different. But how can the passphrase be compromised? Yeah, like I mentioned, if I've stored it on a cloud service, if I've sent, we've seen it before, sent over in clear text, if someone sees it, something like that. So if someone has physical access to the physical piece of paper as well, of course. So those are a couple of ways the recovery phrase could be compromised. Joseph also asks, is the private key 24 recovery phrase plus PIN code? What is private key and where can I see it? So I'm just going to probably rephrase the question just to make sure I can be more specific here. What is the private key? Let's answer that question. A private key generally relates to a pair between the public and the private keys. The public key is generally speaking going to be how you identify. So it can be derived in some way or changed in some way, but it's generally going to be how you identify an address. So it might correspond to an address or an extended public key. I might be getting off track, but essentially the private key is what you use to sign transactions for a particular address. Let's think on, let's say Ethereum, for example. You have 0xA as the address and you need 000 private key, let's say, for example, to sign for that address. So that's kind of how I would think about it. The private key is derived from the recovery phrase in particular. So a 24-word recovery phrase will have many potential private keys that it can use and manage. So that's one way to think about it too. Also, finally, Joseph, you mentioned if a hacker knows your 24-word recovery phrase and doesn't know your PIN code, can my assets be hacked? Yes. The recovery phrase is essentially how you derive all of the required private keys to be able to manage those assets. So the recovery phrase is the most important part here. So regardless of whether you're using a software wallet, hardware wallet, if the recovery phrase is compromised, all the assets that could be managed by those addresses, in those addresses, could potentially be compromised as well. Okay, so that hopefully I answered a lot of those questions there. I mean, of course, you can continue to ask any that you might have as well. So let's keep going. Anthony mentions, is the Ledger Stacks able to send crypto instead of a computer or phone? No. The Ledger device, the Ledger Stacks itself does have the ability to communicate like the Ledger Nano X does. It just does require the phone or the PC. Why? Because it needs somehow to broadcast the transactions. It doesn't. The Ledger Stacks doesn't have like 4G or anything like that in particular. So you will need a computer or a phone. Pistol Pete asks about Casper tokens, which I sent from my Ledger Nano from an exchange. Are my keys on my Ledger or are they in the Casper Live wallet? So it does depend on how you've gotten the address. So generally speaking, if you've just used, because I do remember wallets, Ledger support, just Google everything. But if you connected with your hardware wallet, and you're using the web wallet, then the private keys, the recovery phrase, and therefore the private keys are always going to be on the device. That will always be the case as long as you haven't, like I mentioned before, stored it online or anything like that. So that's going to be really important. So if you're using the web wallet, you're just using the web wallet as an interface. The web wallet may ask the ledger device to sign transactions in particular, and you will use the ledger device as a way to look at it and be like, hey, this is my trusted screen. I'm going to look at this contract and be like, okay, I'm sending to this address. I'm making sure that what I can see on my ledger device matches what I see on screen. Because if it doesn't, then there's going to be huge red flags about why your computer or your phone might not be showing the correct address, whether it might be some malware or you're signing a transaction that that might be compromising your security as well. So those are things to consider. But yes, to really answer the question, the keys, the recovery phrase, and the private keys are always going to be on the ledger device, as long as you maintain a good sense of security around the words as well. Godly Encounters mentions unable to swap on ledger compared to selling crypto, but we need to be able to sell on there too. Would be a change the game, not just Bitcoin. Yeah, it's totally something that I wish that there were more of as well. So I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom there, see if there's any quick ones I can rattle off as well. Dodi Alf mentions, does the Ledger S support NFTs? So the Ledger Nano S specifically does support NFTs. Now, there is one thing that may come up, is that if you're using Ledger Live and you're sending an NFT, it'll mention that it's not supported for sending in particular. The workaround at this stage would be to manage your NFTs with another service. You can use like Rarible, OpenSea. You can still use the Ethereum application, and you might need to log in with a third-party wallet potentially as well. But in general, the Ledger Nano device is able to sign transactions for NFTs and things like that as well. So if you're ever having any issues, like I mentioned, get a hold of us. Just make sure to get a hold of us at support.ledger.com, and you can drop it down on the bottom right-hand side here. There's a button that will say to contact us. That's just covered by my cam as well. The reason I wanted to mention that is because, again, we don't ask for your recovery phrase. I think this is hopefully it should be something that you guys are all aware of now. We don't want you guys to lose any of your assets. So definitely please just keep that safe. We always harp on it as well. Cool, boom. I just want to move up a bit just to see if there's any other questions. Teflon Wan, I have a lot of SHIB. Had them on Bitbart, now they're on Coinbase. I was planning to move them to Ledger, however, I think it will trigger a sale if I do move them to my Ledger. What should I do? It's more bordering on financial advice. I'm not a tax accountant for you, because it may depend on country as well, Teflon. So it might be something you just need to consider, double check if it's a lot, especially. You might need to have a chat with whoever you do taxes with, just to make sure everything's above board. It wouldn't be something that I'd be able to advise you on. Okay, so before that, Ali, I have is, okay, so it looks like there's more. Ali, verified, not using, I have remembered partly with FTX before. I'm not sure what you meant by I have. Is this part of yours verified? If you're talking about what I mentioned before, as long as you're not storing your assets on on a centralized place, of course, because you have your keys, you have the assets. That's probably the best I can say with regards to your questions there, Ali. I think Godly Accounters, you also mentioned need to be able to sell XRP, Shiba on Ledger. I think, like I mentioned, normally, again, if you're not able to make the conversion to a supported asset with these third-party services, I know that there are centralized exchanges that will be able to do that for you guys as well. Honestly, it's actually what I do. If I need actual fiat for my assets, so just something to keep in mind as well. Boom. Okay. Dodie Alf, is it possible to do multi-sig on Ledger devices? It is. There are options that you can use. I'm trying to look for it, if it's in here or if it's outside. If I remember correctly, I've got all the experimental apps showing as well. Boom, where is it? The ones that I always remember, off the top of my head, there are definitely other third-party services, but you can definitely use your assets in particular. So you can use your wallets in particular to do multi-sig for sure. It just depends on what blockchain you want to do it on and how you want to do it in particular. So it does depend there. Ramon, in relation, I think I was asking in relation to NFTs on Ledger Live or on the Ledger itself. On the Ledger itself, if I remember, you're talking about NFTs. Okay, so Ali, keep coming. On Twitter, I see some scams with XRP, phishing, and other attacks where they drain your wallet. How is this possible? And more important, how do we keep our XRP and wallets safe? Generally speaking, phishing is exactly what it sounds like, and it's just they're phishing for your credentials, right? So normally XRP support will have. I'm just going to look for the particular support page, but XRP does come with memos, and memos can have some arbitrary amount of text, and you can put a link in there, for example. So you might be seeing similar situations with things like address poisoning that I mentioned at the start, where they're looking for you to interact with either a link in some way so that they can potentially get your credentials and manage your assets accordingly. These are really the basis for most of these attacks, especially with XRP. So that's the most major thing that I think of, is making sure not to interact with any links that you see in memos. If you're managing, if you're clicking on links in memos and they're promising things that are too good to be true, then it's probably too good to be true most of the time. So I think that's really the biggest thing with regards to XRP. Recovery phrase is always going to be important because your recovery phrase is going to be how you manage assets as well. So those are the two main things, Ali, that I'd mention about protecting yourself. If the funds are, let's say you've been compromised, the recovery phrase is compromised. What's next? First of all, is that any assets that you do have, you're going to want to take them out and make sure you send them to an address that is not derived from the same recovery phrase. Whether or not that's a hot wallet, you can do that just to make sure you get them out of the address. Just the first thing that I would do. There are instances where maybe they're waiting for you to input, the native token. So let's say you're on Ethereum mainnet, you've got a bunch of NFTs, your ENS domain, and you keep putting in ETH to be able to get those out, and they keep taking it out. So that might be a scenario where you might want to stop and consider how you want to deal with that situation as well. I think additionally, probably what I would be thinking of is also, resetting your device, getting a new address, getting the new recovery phrase ASAP as well. We'll be able to liaise with the police potentially if you want to raise a case. You want someone to, actually try to find how the funds are being distributed. Let's say they go to a centralized exchange. The police are going to be the ones that are best to speak to, as opposed to us. We'll try to give them as much information as we can based on your consent, of course, as well, and things like that. So get a hold of us if you ever have any thoughts or questions. We'll try to guide you. We can guide you through the process as best we can in terms of how to manage the process as well. Obviously, we're not going to be the ones that are going out and trying to, be vigilantes and try to do anything like that. But of course, we're going to try to help the law enforcement as best they can. Joe Moo mentions a ticket that you've already raised. I'll make sure to take a note of that, and we'll try to personally have a look at that as well and try to answer that in particular. So I'll make sure to note that now. There we go. So Dodie mentions, yep, as an Aussie like myself, I was just wondering if what ledger products are tax deductible for your everyday retail investor. Again, it's a bit of a, I'm not a tax, I'm not like an accountant or anything. I'm not sure what would be tax deductible. It might depend on your business. Again, so wish I could help with that one. That help for myself, to be honest, right? Like that would be great. Chris the Alien, is there a difference between Ledger Market Pass Genesis versus the Ledger Infinity Pass? It's like you mentioned, the Genesis, the Infinity Pass doesn't have a limit, so there's going to be an infinite amount that can be minted. The Genesis Pass will always remain at 10,000. That's something that we'll be aware of, and the benefits will be better for the guys with the Genesis Pass than it would be for the Infinity Pass. You can see here that you might be able to gain access to special editions, I think is the really big one at the moment for a lot of our devices. You would have been able to mint a Ledger Stacks. I think these are really good ways for you to give Ledger devices to friends and family without, using any using any like card or anything like that. You can just send them the redemption NFT, right? You send it to them. It's a great way for someone to, they might already have an address with a software wallet. You just send them the address. They can redeem it themselves, get it sent out to them. You don't even need to know, their address, their email, whatever. Just send it to their actual like Ethereum address, for example, and they can redeem it themselves. So I think it's a great way to do that. So those are some of the benefits that you might have with the Genesis Pass, particularly, and they're always trying to do as much as they can to provide for those holders as well. So you can check it out. You can come on the Discord, actually. There are always people there that do hold it, trying to get a lot of those, because I got a lot of those art pieces that you get airdropped for holding them. For example, the Argoria one that I got airdropped, actually, I used it on the Ledger Stacks background, which looks great, actually, which, to be honest, I'd never had a Kindle before, so using one was a really great experience, and to see the gradients that it could do, great. I'm so stoked for the Stacks, but obviously I'm a little bit biased. Camille, am I eligible for airdrops when staking Cosmos Atom on Ledger Live? Is that only available when staking through Kepler Wallet? Not sure of you might have to be more specific on the type of airdrop, because each airdrop might be more, will have a specific criteria, generally speaking. Maybe we can do some of the research here if we need to. Prem, yes, there is a Discord as well. Normally you should just be able to jump on Ledger Discord. Boom. Ledger open, and you should be able to jump on there as well. Boom. So yep, you can see the invite. So jump on. We're always there. I'm always trying to answer questions there as well. Generally a pretty fun atmosphere. I like to meme as well. So always a little fun. Other advancements being made in XTC storage integrations or XTC wallet access with the hardware wallet. My understanding is that we should be able to use at least XTC with the hardware wallet. In particular, you might need to use a third-party service to manage the asset, as far as I'm aware, but that's, I'll have to double check that and test it myself as well. That would be my understanding, yes, with my crypto wallet. Boom. I'm going to keep trying to rattle off these questions here just before we run out of time. After a Ledger Live reset, so you deleted the saved directory. The Ledger Live drops in a recycle bin shredded. There is not allowed. How to fully delete it. That might be more something to do with permissions. I regularly do that, actually, so it's been okay for me. Otherwise, just to make sure Ledger Live is closed, I think, to make sure that you're able to do that. Otherwise, get a hold of us, because I'm definitely able to do that myself, I'm assuming, because that's app data, that's going to be Windows. So those are the two main ones that I can think of that might be stopping you. Bapidas mentions CL card outside the US. I'm currently in Taiwan. We're trying to roll out the CL card as quickly as we can, but I'll make sure to note that I know there's lots of people itching to get their hands on it, and we're going to try and do that as best we can. So I'll definitely pass that up in particular. Boom, and there's my colleague answering questions in the chat as well about nano devices being paired. One thing to note as well is that normally, generally speaking, you should be able to rename the devices. Especially for myself, I do have a lot of devices working here, so renaming them is really a good way to make sure that you are interacting with the same, the correct account, but also the correct device rather, but also the same account. So when you're in Ledger Live and you've added a particular asset, I'm just going to see if we can add one now. But when you do add multiple of the same account, you come up with different addresses. You might operate with different devices as well. It's really important to make sure if you're not interacting with the right account, you might be signing with the wrong private key, for example. So I always rename them. It makes it totally easier, and I actually put tape on my devices as well because I've got so many. But obviously, not everyone's going to have many devices like me, so you can name it whatever you want. Okay. There we go. Yes, Bapi does about the H bar. Yes, you do need to use hashpack. That is a thing. It is just a nature of this particular chain. With hashpack, we'll definitely be able to pass on the feedback about it. Obviously, not everyone is comfortable stepping outside of Ledger Live to be able to manage assets in particular. It's just I'll definitely pass on the feedback. It's just the way it is with some assets. For example, me personally, I'm going to be totally stoked when they introduce, Arbitrum and Optimism and stuff like that. But they haven't as of yet. So, always ways around it, but some of them are just the way it is, annoyingly enough. So I think with HBAR, we would have to use hashpack for the foreseeable future, but we'll obviously make sure to pass on the feedback that it is something that you guys want to do directly within Ledger Live as well. So other than that, I think I've already touched on most of the topics that I've wanted to mention. We've got address poisoning, making sure that you guys always go through the receive process when you're managing your assets, right? Let me just jump back because address poisoning. Boom. One of my colleagues wrote this in particular, just making sure that you don't select this address, just any random address, making sure you go through the receive process, and making sure you check the number, as many, 5, 6, 7, all of them if you can. That way you know that the exact address that you're sending to is going to be the exact address, please. We don't want you sending, and you can always use test amounts as well. Abidas, I think you also mentioned, can you also let me know how to do I stake BTC in Ledger? Staking BTC isn't something that can be done on its native token, on its native network of Bitcoin. You could potentially stake with third-party services if it's wrapped, for example. So that's something that you might need to consider if you'd like to do. We actually had this discussion internally. I'm going to bring up wrapped BTC would be one of them. Where is it? I always like to go to CoinMarketCap. But basically a representation of BTC on Ethereum network. You can see here that they even got the contract address as well. So something to consider. I wouldn't suggest doing it like just without considering what it is you might be doing, just to understand what the potential risks might be, if it might be pegged artificially or whatever the deal might be. Okay, Kevin, hi there, use recovery phrases to restore the old Ledger device so we have a new device. If the old device is lost, someone has the PIN, can they send receive from the old assets? Okay, I just wanted to rephrase it. So if we have, let's say I have two devices. I've got my stacks here, got my, my Ledger Nano S here. The recovery phrase that I've set up with my Ledger Nano S, I set up with my stacks. Okay, if someone has the pin to this device and I haven't reset it, right, I'll be able to manage it as I would normally. If I have the pin for this device and it's set up with the recovery phrase A, for example, with both of these devices, I'll be able to manage it as per normal as well. I'll need to reset this and make sure the recovery phrase is not set up, so reset back to factory settings. So that would be inputting the pin incorrectly 3 times, and that would reset the device. I would then not be able to manage any of my assets because I'd need to set up the corresponding recovery phrase. I think that's the main thing about what would be the most important thing with regards to managing your assets with multiple devices. Just which recovery phrase have you set up the device with? The pin is just something that's set up per device, so it doesn't really matter. Taking a pin, choosing the same pin for one versus the other is going to be fine. So again, it's the most important part is which recovery phrase have you set up each device with, and you'll be able to manage the corresponding addresses that are derived from that recovery phrase. I hope that makes better sense, because I don't know that hopefully I've answered the question there. Boom. Okay, so hope it does. You received an NFT from Polygon, okay, from a 00x. So that sounds like a mint, but yes, exactly. You've received it from some random address. They're trying to get you to interact with it, right? They're trying to get you to maybe sell it or something like that. Don't do it. Don't touch it. You can hide it within Ledger Live. So one thing, again, we've got a huge amount of articles, so I'd really recommend going into our help center to do so, but you can hide an NFT, so at least we don't have to see it, because they look really terrible, don't they? So it's just something to do if you continuously get it, because I just sent one NFT, I remember, and then they just started coming in on Polygon again and again and again. So it's annoying. Hopefully there'll be a better solution going forward in the future. We'll see how we can go with that. Raspberry, why does my Ledger Nano S say malfunction and hardware is not recognized by the manufacturer? My computer, the first thing I always think of is what version of Ledger Live are you using, what version of operating system are you using, and what version is your device firmware. So those are the very broad strokes that I'd normally think of about some connection issues. Have you tested it on multiple USB ports? Have you tested it on multiple computers if you can? Just something to consider. Just to be able to isolate the issue and for us to find out what might be affecting that for you in particular. Those are my normal, really general troubleshooting steps. If you're getting any error messages, it might be might be able to direct us into what we might need to do as well. Okay, so Ramon, you can also use a pin over pin and a 24 word for the Ledger Nano S. I think 25 word, I'm assuming, yes, you mean the passphrase feature. I'm just going to bring that up. I use it, but I've only used it in very specific circumstances for myself in particular. So when I wanted to mess around with a specific private key, I made sure to derive that using outside tools, which I generally wouldn't recommend. But generally was trying to just mess around with a very specific weird derivation path, that kind of thing, with recovery phrases. I've used them for, but you can attach it to a pin. So you can attach it to, I have my normal pin set for 1111 maybe, and then I have another pin set for 0000, and 0000 will correspond to a very specific set of accounts, and 1111 can correspond to another. And that way, if someone were to perform a wrench attack on me, so someone tries to rob me physically, I could be like, oh, I have this account, and this will be 10% of my total assets. It's something plausible. So it's plausible deniability is what the passphrase really does for a user in the event that it's big enough that someone might try to physically attack you for it. Okay, so continuing on, does Ledger plan to integrate Shamir secret sharing? It's not a plan that I know of, but it's definitely something that we'll look towards could look towards in the future. It's definitely not something that I'll be able to decide, but I'll make sure to pass on the feedback. Kevin GR. So definitely something will be very cool. I'd love to be able to see way more different things within the Ledger ecosystem. All right, so this won't drain my account as I received the NFT from the scammer. I can still interact with my native network. You can Polygon network. You can still interact with the account as a whole. Just don't interact with the NFT. So if you want to send it, if you want to, let's say, burn it, for example, don't do any of that. If you want to accept an offer on OpenSea, don't do that, because you may call a function on the smart contract that might do something that we are not able. That might compromise your security. To put it as simply as possible. Is there a way to send NFTs on your Ledger wallet without using MetaMask? How can I get it done? I would assume QR in that case, you might be using a Ledger Nano S. In particular, it wouldn't be something you can use another third-party service like Tallyho, Rabby. I know different wallets that you can use to sign transactions or to create those transactions for the Ledger device to sign. In particular, so let me know if that's the specific case you're talking about. Otherwise, you should be able to use Ledger Live to do it if you have a Ledger Nano X, Ledger Nano S Plus, or in the future a Ledger Stacks as well. Okay. Yesterday, so County Sheepdog mentions that you unstaked your Atom, and it said 21 days before you can withdraw the funds. Does that mean Ledger can essentially lock up my other funds at any time they want? No. This would be something that's more related to the mechanisms of staking with Atom in particular. So there are a lot of staking mechanisms that require you to wait a certain amount of time before you can move funds to make sure that people can't withdraw a huge amount of liquidity in a short amount of time, just as a general example. So it's not something that we are locking up in particular. Remember that as long as you maintain the private keys for a particular, so I always come back to Ethereum because it's where my comfort zone is. But let's say I have like some USDC for an address 0x1. Only the private key for 0x1 can sign transactions for that Ethereum or that USDC in particular. So it's just something to. So if you own the keys for that account or for that address, then you can manage whatever you can sign transactions with that from that address in particular, right? So with Atom in this case, it would be my understanding would be part of the mechanism of the actual unstaking staking. So it's not something that Ledger actually locks up. Andrea, hopefully I haven't butchered it. Is it possible to connect my Ledger Nano S Plus to the Android app Ledger Live? Yes. I do it myself. I've got a One Plus in particular, and I use a USB-C to USB-C cable, which you should have in the on-the-go pack. But it can depend on what phone that you have. So if you have a phone with a micro USB cable or something, a port or something like that, you might need to use the corresponding cable. Other than that, might need some more troubleshooting if you're still experiencing issues. But especially when I connect via USB, I've had a great experience. But obviously, working here, it is a little bit biased for me. Ledger should support insert coins. I'll make sure to jot those down in particular. We'll make sure to try to. We can try to integrate them, but generally speaking, the developers are going to want to come to us to make sure they can integrate the coin into our application ecosystem and so on and so forth. So if you know the developers, you can definitely have them reach out to us and we can work with them to try and integrate that in particular. I have an Nano X. I don't have access to a laptop, just an iPad. I want to know if I can send NFTs to my ETH address. You can send NFTs to your ETH address. The thing about just using an iPad QR when you're managing your NFTs in this case would be that the Ledger device itself potentially would need to be updated in terms of the firmware, in terms of application software, things like that. And you actually do need to connect it either to a PC, so that's a Mac OS or Windows, or an Android phone. iPad, I know, does have the USB. The newer iPads do have the USB-C ports, but I think there are some connectivity restrictions when dealing with Apple in particular, is my understanding. So that's a particular thing that you might need to take into account there. So you can still manage with your Ledger Nano X in particular, but you might need to use, you can even use a friend's laptop potentially. I know it's not the best solution when you're updating firmware and things like that, but the reason I wanted to mention it is because that will be something that you eventually might have to do. Yeah, it's an unfortunate restriction that we have to deal with as well. So I wish I had a better solution with regards to that. It is made, so the Ledger devices are made so that you don't have to trust the device that you're using. So that's why you have a screen. The screen is so important on the Ledger device, because you see, okay, this is the specific contract I might be interacting with. This is the specific address I'm sending to or from. So again, if you guys have any more questions, pop them in the chat. It's probably coming up towards the time I might need to be running out of time. OI Neos mentions when is Ergo coming to Ledger. Don't have a specific time frame for you with regards to that, unfortunately. But they're always trying to integrate as quickly as they can. Again, get a hold of us at support.ledger.com. We do have a huge amount of tickets, but we'll try to get to you as quickly as we can. Obviously, I'm here to try and answer your quick questions as quickly as possible, and go from there. QR to follow up. So basically, I can use the Nano X with a USB cable to connect with an Android phone and do it like that. Yes, for firmware updates, you can connect via USB. You can connect a USB cable as well to perform the firmware update. Yes, you should be able to connect via Bluetooth. Otherwise, if you're just managing your assets as per usual. If you have trouble, yeah, get a hold of us, Discord and everything like that. Okay. So yes, get a hold of us, support.ledger.com. I'll try to answer everything that we can. You can jump on the Discord as well. I'll be normally there trying to answer questions and things like that as well. I know that there were a couple of cases in the chat that were mentioned, so we'll try to get on that as soon as we can as well. Hope you guys had a good holiday season. It was a crazy year, never a dull day in crypto, as we say quite often here. Hopefully we'll be able to keep you guys safe. Again, stay safe out there. Don't give out your 24 words. Don't sign any transactions that you're not that you don't totally understand. We want you guys to keep safe. Stay safe out there, and yeah, have a good day.